Thank you for joining us on this really beautiful day. Please grab some food if you haven't already, and please join us up front. Like I always say, this isn't class. No one will call on you. So please come up front. There's some very comfortable couches up here. Before we get to our main event today, I want to shamelessly plug a few upcoming events. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming to What Matters to Me and Why. This is our third What Matters to Me and Why of, I think, our 16th year. Next month, we'll have our last one of the semester featuring Chief John Thomas of DPS right here at USC. I also want to wish a happy Ash Wednesday to all of you who are celebrating Ash Wednesday today. As many of you know, we are doing an Ash Wednesday ceremony right now at Tommy Trojan, but there'll also be Ash Wednesday services at 5:30 and 7:30 p.m. today at the Crusoe Catholic Center. That's open to everyone, Catholic, Christian, non-Christian, anyone who's interested in attending, please go at either 5:30 or 7:30 for Ash Wednesday at Crusoe Catholic Center. We're also hosting an event this evening called Mindful Christianity. It's a book event featuring our Associate Dean of Religious Life, Jim Burklow. His new book is called Mindful Christianity. It explores mindfulness practices from a Christian perspective. That event is free and open to the public as well. That's at 5 p.m. at the Fishbowl at the University Religious Center. If anyone's in my class, that's an extra credit opportunity for you, just like this is. And also, this week is our second installment of the Homeless Awareness Week. We did one in the fall. We're doing one right now in the spring. That's every day this week from 12:30 to 2:30 at Alumni Park. You can go there and learn more information about how you can get involved with a university-wide initiative focused on ending homelessness right here in Los Angeles. So please check that out as well. I'm really grateful today for the opportunity to introduce our very special guest speaker, my friend and colleague, Dr. Paula Cannon. She is Professor of Molecular Microbiology and Immunology, Pediatrics, Biochemistry, and Molecular Biology at the Keck School of Medicine, where she leads a research team that studies viruses, stem cells, and gene therapy. She has a long-standing interest in the development of gene therapy as a clinical approach to treating HIV infection, and her research is funded by both the National Institute of Health and the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. I first got to know Paula last year when she was vice president of the Academic Senate. She's the president of the Academic Senate this year, so she's extremely busy. I'm super grateful to her for participating today. I know how busy she is, and I know she's also on the health science campus, so it's really a very, we're really so happy to be able to welcome her today. But in the work that she's been doing with the Academic Senate over the last 2 years, she's really tackled the most difficult issues in higher education, from faculty unionization to support of non-tenure track faculty to campus safety issues to issues of race and equity and inclusion, the challenges around those conversations and the new policies that we've developed over the last 2 years. To most recently, some of the fallout from the executive order that has negatively impacted many of our international students and scholars on our campus. She's really on the front lines of the most difficult work. And she brings to that work a great sense of optimism, but also an approach that's data-driven, that's results-focused, that's evidence-based. We need more of that in the world today in this age of alternative facts. To have someone who has the data is really important. So I'm really grateful to her work, not just as a researcher and a professor, but as a university leader, helping us wrestle with some of the most difficult issues that we're facing as a community today. So all that being said, please join me in welcoming to the What Matters to Me and Why stage, Dr. Paula Cannon.
Have to do is lower the microphone always. Okay. So this is the first time I've ever given a talk where I'm going to refer to notes. You know, I'm a professor. I speak a lot. I usually have PowerPoint behind me. So you probably, if you see me doing this, you know what? You know, I'm actually trying to make happen. So, okay, confession time. When Varun asked me to do this, my first thought was, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to talk about. No. Actually, my first thought was, oh, how can I get out of this? You know, I'd never heard of this, which is really bad. But then I went online and looked it up, and it got even worse because I realized that some pretty impressive people have already spoken in this series, and worse than that, and there's my man over there, it gets videoed. So I have this horror that, I don't know, sometime in the future, my future great-grandchildren who are going to be doing like a research project about, what did the family do, are going to type in my name and they're going to find this. So hello, future great-grandchildren, right? So, so actually, to sort of be serious for a moment, when Varun did ask me about this, I knew straight away what I was going to talk about, because the thing that matters to me are facts, and in particular, scientific facts, and the way that a scientific training can make you appreciate and seek out facts. And who knew, 3 months ago, I think, when I was asked to do this, that picking a topic like facts would turn out to be so topical. So let me give you some background. You've already heard that I'm a professor in the Keck School. I'm not a doctor. I'm a full-time research scientist, and I run a group. And my group's trying to develop new ways of treating diseases. Sometimes we call that gene therapy or cell therapy. And the idea behind it is that if people have really serious illnesses that we currently can't treat, and that can include things like genetic diseases that people are born with, or infectious diseases like HIV or hepatitis that people acquire but then kind of can't get rid of. Maybe we need to be thinking about new types of medicines to tackle those. And so we sometimes think about going into, if you like, the building blocks of our bodies, the cells and the genes, and trying to alter them, to improve them, to make them resistant to the disease, to basically try and cure people. So I'm not going to be talking about this, but at the end in the Q&A, if any of you guys are interested, I do sort of work on the cusp of some things that are kind of ethically questionable, shall we say, and people often have questions about what we can do in terms of genetically engineering people. So if you have questions at the end, we can weigh into that. So I'm a scientist, and I'm a totally accidental scientist. I didn't really like it in school. I certainly never planned to be a scientist. Have I got any scientists in the audience? Okay, right. So I don't know, did you guys always want to be scientists? No? Okay. See, this is like a dirty little secret, though. I think for the rest of you who aren't scientists, you probably assume that scientists, we kind of, we ask for a microscope for our 5th birthday present or something. No, I really didn't like science at all. But the school I went to, if you were kind of like a smart kid, it was kind of almost assumed that you would go into science, and I was flattered by the description, so that's how I went into science. So I found myself studying some subjects that at the time I found very dry. Physics, chemistry. Thank goodness for biology. Biology was the one science I liked. Do you know why I liked biology? I actually like biology because it's got more art in it. You get to draw things in biology, whether it's a cross-section of a leaf or a buttercup root or something like that. There's a lot of illustration in biology, and I kind of like that. So obviously my career, probably should have been an illustrator rather than a scientist. But my favorite piece of biology was a little single-cell organism that lives in fresh water called the amoeba. Do you guys know what amoebas are? Yeah, because they're kind of like a meme, aren't they? They're those kind of like, kind of squiggly shaped things that just eat things in the water. So I like those, probably because they were easy to draw as well. And so when it came time for me to, think about going to college, the only thing I could think of doing was something in biology that would allow me to work with these little tiny things. So I chose microbiology, because it kind of sounds like that's what it should be. So there I was, 18 years of age, going to college to do microbiology because I was a frustrated illustrator. So you can sort of see where this is going, yeah? I wasn't really serious about being a scientist. And then I went to college in a city called Liverpool in England. That's where the accent comes from. And while I was there, honestly, I had a blast. It was a great city to be in. It had a lot of music, a lot of culture, a lot of humor. And most of my friends were actually musicians. And so I ended up spending a lot of time not doing science, but hanging out with people who were musicians. And then I sort of ended up working in recording studios. I had a band in Liverpool that I got them a record deal. And all of a sudden it was like, oops, now I'm working in the music business. So again, this really annoys people, because I know there may even be people in the audience who say to me, I really want to work in the music business. I'm majoring in Thornton and I'm doing a minor in the Marshall School and I really want to go into the music business. And I go, oh, I did microbiology and fell into it like that. So I'm not sure if there's a lesson in that. So I was working in the music business, and that's what I did when I left college. And I loved music. I still do. There was a great deal of just beauty and fun in music. Unfortunately, I didn't find that to be the case in the music business. And I think for an industry where a lot of people go into it with dreams, it's almost a given that there's going to be a lot of people whose dreams get crushed. And so I started to view it as not this kind of wonderful job that I thought it would be, but rather a job where I was sort of dealing with the fallout a lot of the time from people not, becoming famous rock stars. And so after a couple of years, I thought, this is not me. I want out. What am I going to do? So at this point, I'm like probably 23 or 24 years old. And seriously, I don't think I had even spent one moment in my life up until that stage thinking about what matters to me. What do I want to do? So I was, in terms of, the what matters to me and why stakes, I was kind of like a late entrant into thinking about that. But when I did think about it in my mid-20s, I realized that, strangely, what mattered to me was science and the experience I'd had at university as an accidental scientist, and the fact that there was something very fundamental and true about science, and that really appealed to me. So that's the what matters to me. Let's go over some of the whys. So why does science matter to me, and the search for facts? So there's kind of two big things I love about science. So the first one is that science and scientific research is just a great leveler. And what I mean by that is, no matter how good you are at public speaking, at presentations, no matter what you say, okay, no matter how much charisma you might have, as a scientist, if your experiment doesn't work or it can't be repeated by other people, it doesn't matter. All those soft skills, which can make you very successful in many aspects of life, are just irrelevant. So I love that about science, because it kind of, at least for me anyway, it sort of keeps me honest. When I find myself going off on a kind of a little, speech about, this is awesome, blah, 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 and then I'll have another scientist say to me, really? And how many times have you done that experiment? Was it replicable? And they have these sort of crushing questions that kind of bring me back down to ground. So that, to me, is a really important thing about being involved in science, is there are things in science that are facts and need to be reproduced for people, for the scientific community to accept them. The other thing I like about being a science and scientific training in general is that I think it makes you very flexible in your thinking, and it allows you to be comfortable with uncertainty. If you think about what a scientist, or at least a research scientist, does most of the time, is we're trying to come up with ideas. Hypothesis is the fancy name for that. And we have our hypotheses tested and challenged. And most of the time we're wrong, and we have to make an adjustment. So we become very comfortable with the idea of having an idea, floating a hypothesis, and then being shot down, of kind of, coming in and realizing that that beautiful experiment you designed has actually told you that everything you've been planning for the last 2 years is wrong, and you have no good data. So I kind of like that, because I think it in other aspects of your life, it maybe makes you very comfortable with thinking about alternative opinions, alternative explanations. And I'm not going to say alternative facts, because there's no such thing, but it does make you comfortable with alternative truths. It also gives you very good training in how to justify and support what you believe. And as Varun said in his introduction, I always say, kind of, show me the data. Let's get it out on the table and think about this. So that's another thing that I think scientific training brings. I would also say being wrong is actually a highlight of being a scientist in many ways. I have no idea who who said this quote. I would love to be able to attribute it to somebody, but there's kind of like a thing that scientists say, which is that, that the best words to ever hear in a scientific research lab is not, oh, that worked, but, oh, that's weird. When you set up an experiment and you come in the next day and you look at the data and it's absolutely blows your mind because it's not what you expected, and importantly, you don't even know where to begin in explaining it. So that tells you straight away that you've kind of lifted the lid on something that's potentially very interesting because it's not what we're expecting. And of course, I'm talking about science as if it's the only way that you can get to these sort of facts and these aspects of truth. And of course, that's not true. In all of the disciplines that we study at this university, they all involve some degree of critical thinking. And they're all different ways to get us to the same viewpoint of being comfortable with exploring other opinions and explanations. Okay, so I kind of feel like I do work on sort of like the cutting edge of medical research at the moment. But really, anybody doing research is working on the cutting edge of human knowledge. That's almost by definition what scientific research is. And when you do that, it's really important to be aware of what it is we currently don't know. So now I'm going to quote Donald Rumsfeld, who's not actually a hero of mine. I just want to put that out there. But I think it was 2002, he was doing a press briefing in the Department of Defense, and he was trying to explain to the journalists about the lack of evidence that the Iraqi government had been given weapons of mass destruction to terrorist groups. So I'm going to read what he said. So he said, okay, reports that say something hasn't happened are always the most interesting to me. Because as we know, there are known knowns. These are the things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things that we do not know. But there are also the unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. Okay, if you're following that, it gets a bit tortuous, doesn't it? And if one looks throughout the history of our country and other free countries, it's the latter category that tends to be the difficult one. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, yeah, Donald Rumsfeld, he never got trained as a scientist, because for a scientist, the unknown unknowns are not the difficult ones. They're actually the thing, they are the reason we do science. They're the favorites of the scientists. So I don't usually quote Donald Rumsfeld, but I would love to meet him one day and sort of explain to him that he shouldn't be afraid. He should embrace the unknown unknowns. And again, this just all comes back to the idea that as a scientist, you're searching for answers, and you're searching to build on the body of facts, and you're searching to contribute something. And it's kind of important not to stay in a safe little bubble of trying to reproduce something or agree with things. It's really important sometimes to kind of stick your neck out there and say, I'm going to go after some of these unknown unknowns. Okay. So I started off by saying I thought it was kind of ironic that I decided I was going to talk about facts, especially in the current political climate. And so I was sort of thinking about, is there a sort of a message that scientists can give, to the country today? And I was thinking, first of all, I would say, understand there is a difference between facts and truth. Facts are things that can't be changed, and they can't be kind of argued or reasoned away because they are facts. They are kind of logic itself. Whereas truth is something that depends on a person's perspective and experience as well. And truth certainly contains facts, but there's also an element of interpretation. And therefore, your truth and your society's truth and other truths can be different and can coexist. And I believe there can be many truths. You could even say there can be alternative truths, but you can never say there will be alternative facts. So my message to you guys is, a scientist would say to you, become comfortable with this idea of alternative explanations, of not knowing, of hypotheses, of people questioning. as scientists, as a group, we tend to come to a consensus at any given time of, what does the scientific community believe is a fact? And I would argue that that's usually the same thing as being a fact. But scientists always know that our facts can also be adjusted if we see new evidence and if we ask the right questions. I think our society would benefit from people becoming more comfortable with unknowns and with nuances and with all the lovely shades of gray of probabilities and possibilities. And I fear at the moment that we are getting away from that. People want to know something. They want to be told this, I can believe this, and then I can sort of switch off my brain and not question it. And even questioning something can be seen as being, you're not part of the team. You absolutely, if you're left or right or up or down, you have to believe and subscribe to these facts and these values. And even questioning any of them, even exhibiting any nuance in your thinking is seen as being a traitor in some ways. So I'm not sure that's good at all. Thinking about what you don't know, although it hurts your brain and it can make you feel uncomfortable socially, should still be considered as a grown-up thing to do, and actually a great joy in life. I mean, it's right up there with, learning to like stinky blue cheese or something. You have to kind of work at it, but when you get there and you like this, you understand that the journey was worth it. So I'm going to end by saying that what matters to me are facts, and the very human endeavor of scientific research with the view of acquiring more facts and understanding things. I think that's just a lovely part of what makes us humans. And I'm kind of in good company here. And because I quoted Donald Rumsfeld, and I don't want to walk away with that was the only person she quoted in her talk, I'm going to end by quoting a real scientist. I'm going to quote the astrophysicist, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He has a very simple little mantra I like. He says, "The good thing about science, it's true whether you believe it or not, and that's why it works." So that's why it matters to me, and that's why. Thanks for your attention. I got my mic so I can leave my podium. Did you guys all get a sandwich? Yeah, I had the tuna, it's pretty good. Okay. Hand you the mic.
First of all, thank you so much for speaking. I think one of the most famous venture capitalists, Peter Thiel, has once said, like, we as a society have so much potential in biomedical research in that we haven't invested as much as we should compared to some other industries, like such as the internet. So from your opinion, like, what are some things we need to invest more?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? Are we investing enough money in biomedical research? So one of the ways I would think about answering that is, I think as a society, it's quite important that we think about how we invest. There's certainly an argument to be made that biomedical research should all be driven by, private industry. We should have biotech companies and big pharmaceutical companies driving the research. And their motive, of course, is, they're decent people and they want to, cure disease and change the world in that way. But there's also a profit motive involved. And in many ways, I think that is problematic for biomedical research. And so to my mind, there's a huge role that charitable foundations and the government have to play in this. And sometimes people have a very short-sighted view of the value of biomedical research. You may have a very rare disease that only affects 100 people in this country, and you would say, well, gosh, we could figure out a way to cure that, but it would cost $25 million. Is that a good use of that money? Heck no. Let's go back to developing the next, statin or Viagra. Let's work on things that are profitable. But by doing research on even things that look like they're going to have very low return on investment, the great thing about research is that's never true. By going after even what you think of as a very, niche market, things get discovered all the time that then have applications in other venues. I think the biggest problem so I'm a biomedical researcher, and I spend my whole life trying to get grants and funding, so I'm quite good at pitching this usually. And I think one of the biggest problems is just lack of biomedical literacy in the population. I mean, it's kind of changing. More and more people are just, you're doing gene therapy in high school, or you're hearing about it, and so people are becoming more interested in it. But I feel like we still have to kind of play catch up with that large numbers of people, including, those people who sit in Congress, are clueless about the value of research. They're clueless about the cost, and they're clueless about how long it can take, and the sort of byproducts that come out of it. But my hope is that if we get some more scientists in Congress, and that if everybody who goes to a university, especially because you have to do some of this through your general education, everybody should be scientifically literate. Everybody should read the New York Times and the LA Times science pages. It's kind of like it's easy to understand, but it'll tell you about some of the great new things that are happening in research. And ultimately, I hope that because it affects us in a very practical way, I mean, this is stuff that's going to affect your body and your future health. Hopefully people will continue to be interested and will support it. Thanks.
So, hello. So the president just announced that over in the Health Science Campus, there's this new biotech area is going to be developed. Mm-hmm. I am kind of wondering, you as a scientist, if you were in charge of developing that whole new space, what would you envision happening, and what would you like to see happen?
Okay, so a lot more coffee bars. No, so on the Health Science Campus, I don't even know if you guys have ever been there. Who's been there? Oh my gosh, that's like almost everybody. Okay, so it's a pretty bleak part of LA, I think I can say. There's not a lot around there. There's some old kind of like public works yards around there. So it's actually, I think, for something that's so close to downtown, it's a fantastic area to talk about putting a biotech park. You may not know this, but Los Angeles is almost unique in terms of being like a major city that really doesn't have the biotech industry that we deserve. You think of the universities we have here and the scientists that we create, and they all go down to San Diego, or they go up to the Bay Area, or even worse, they go to Boston, because that's where a lot of the biotech companies are. So LA is just so ripe for this to happen. We're having some activity in biotech, down on in sort of, on the beach, things are happening. But I really think that it would be fantastic to site a biotech park next to the Health Science Campus. And what would be so cool? So I've been involved in starting up about 3 or 4 companies now. But in the last one I was involved in it had to go and find lab space in Pasadena, which means, mentally I'm never going to go out there. But if there was something I could walk to, if there was like a little company that, a few professors got together and we got some venture capital and we set up a little company, that would be awesome. We could just walk to that. And even better, my students, my graduate students, I could give them a real hands-on taste of what it's like to be involved in biotech. So I think, it's going to be great for LA as a city, but I also think it will really improve the quality of education we can deliver to our future biomedical scientists, especially those at the Health Science Campus. So I hope it happens.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and talking to us
No,
today.
it's fun. It's great here. I've never been to this place.
My question's more about like facts and how we, as students, should navigate through in social media platforms that now give everyone the privilege to state whatever they want to state.
Yeah.
And although we have tabloids and journals that we can look to for facts and for evidence for various claims that are being made, but how essentially we stop our brains from kind of jumping to what we see on our daily social media. It's very tempting to just look at my Facebook newsfeed and just read everything and almost be tempted to believe that, and then have to go back to the New York Times and double check with what's actually happening. And so in this new age of various various claims being made on various different platforms, how do you really navigate through it and really believe in what you want to, really find the facts out there and believe in them? It's really tough now.
So I think the first thing to do is, forgive yourself. So I'm going to be honest, I get most of my news from my Facebook feed. Luckily, it usually takes me to the New York Times or the Washington Post, but I get that, and there's a certain sophisticated type of clickbait that gets fed in through those systems, but it's still, you are reading what you are primed to agree with. You're looking for content that just affirms what you already know or believe. And I tried to make myself not do that, but honestly, that's like giving up sugar in your coffee. I just sort of said, I can't do this. That's okay. I'm going to allow myself like an hour a day where I just read things that I know I'm going to agree with, because that's like giving me the sugar. It kind of like fortifies me in some ways. But then I'm also going to try and find thoughtful commentaries that are different. So I also subscribe to a couple of more right-wing, okay, I'm a liberal, right, just in case you hadn't gathered that. But I do subscribe to some sort of more right-wing publications, and I'll often go and read things like the Wall Street Journal. And I love when I read something and I recognize in myself that I have that and then I'm like, oh, that's just because my liberal bias is showing and I'm like not able to read this properly. And then I will go back and reread that and really think about it. And I try to apply my scientific training to the question. And I'm like, what's the evidence? Why am I agreeing with this? And so again, I don't think we can avoid it. It's just, and this is not new. I mean, I know that social media is making it very obvious, but actually this is what humans do. There's something in our brains that is constantly looking for affirmation. We don't like to live in a state of worry and anxiety and questioning. We like to just have things confirmed for us. So in the olden days, we did it by, having, talking to our friends and having conversations where we all sort of agreed, and then we could all sit back and feel very, good about ourselves because we discussed it. So I think social media is just highlighting something that humans do anyway. But certainly your generation is the first generation that has had this in spades, that you've really got to kind of figure out how to do it. And I think the challenge is, how do you engage with people around it? And actually, how do you engage with people online? We've all done it, haven't we? You compose a reply on Facebook. You spend 20 minutes composing it. It's so perfect. You think you've taken out any, it's not too controversial. It's not too aggressive. It's beautifully argued, and you post it. And then 2 seconds later, somebody responds in a way the way you just think, like I've been slapped. So I've kind of stopped trying to do things by my typing, and instead, sometimes I just make a mental note of, next time I see that person, I'm going to engage them about that. And I often use humor. I will say things like, oh my God, that comment you put on Facebook had me in hysterics. Seriously, why do you believe that? And I just go straight into it, because I find if you're talking one-on-one, you can react and pivot as people are talking. But importantly, you're also listening, and you are letting yourself be open to the fact that they actually might have a really good point that you've missed. So.
I was just curious how whether or not your line of research has changed your ethical viewpoints or just solidified them.
I'd say it's changed them, actually. So I do a lot of work where I have to think about some things that, are ethically, that are questions that society raises. So, for example, I work with fetal tissue because that's a source of stem cells that is relatively easy to get, and we can do research with that. And if I didn't have access to that tissue, it would really reduce the impact of some of the work that I can do. my lab also does a lot of what we call genome engineering, where we can go in and we can change genes. And most people, when we're talking about doing that with a group of cells that are just sitting in a dish, most people are kind of cool with that. But when we talk about actually going in and doing that in people, then appropriately there are questions. People will say to me, well, gosh, are you playing God? And because I'm a sort of a biologist, my response, which I'm going to try not to, sometimes it comes across as quite trite, but I'll say, no, I'm just changing some genes. That's not playing God. That's just doing, a little bit of kind of like tune-up of people. Things go wrong in your body. Cells go rogue. That's cancer. Cells stop working well. Your immune system doesn't recognize you've been infected with something. There's all these things that go wrong all the time. And I think of myself as like an engineer. I know how to go in and get everything, back in line and tune things up. And the fact that I do it by, altering genes or altering cells is to me, I'm very comfortable with that. But I think that's because I'm very comfortable with thinking of human beings as this extraordinary, amazing entity that also has this kind of rather boring pedestrian body they have to sit in, and we need to just make sure the bodies are okay. But your question was, have I changed? I think I've changed in that I never gave these things thought before. I always thought that, quite honestly, if anybody just said the word ethics to me, I would immediately fall asleep. But I have had to think about this, and I do think about this all the time. And maybe I've surprised myself in the way that I've come down thinking that, to me, the sort of research I'm doing is on the continuum of what humans have been doing forever. We are taking our environment and ourselves and thinking about how we can better adapt ourselves for the current situations that we find ourselves in. And I think, fighting diseases is just a very human thing to be doing. So. It's like being in a nightclub up here, by the way. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's like, I wasn't expecting this. Where's the strobe? Somebody back there, yeah?
Hi, thank you for coming. As an outsider to the scientific industry, I think I've been hearing for the past 10 years or so that we're just on the brink of a breakthrough in cancer research or other types of research. In your opinion, are we really that close, or is it that the more research we do, the more we find out, it's a lot more complicated than we had previously thought?
Sure, and that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things going on here. One is that, you have to kind of forgive scientists and doctors. We do talk up, things that happen, and maybe by the time it gets filtered through the newspapers and gets out onto the ground, and people are like, wait a minute, I voted for that proposition in California to fund stem cell research, and I thought that you were going to fix, Christopher Reeve. Why didn't that happen? And so I think some of the problem is that the time scale involved, which is very comfortable to scientists, is quite alien to people who are not scientists. They're like, seriously, this is going to take 20 years? Wow, yeah. And then I say to people, well, now that you know it's going to take 20 years, do you think we should not bother? Or would you still like me to go ahead and try and cure cancer? And they're like, well, if you put it like that, I think you should go ahead, yeah. So some of it is just, we've not been very good at communicating expectations. The other thing is that, oh my gosh, amazing things are really happening. Should I pick on one of my favorites? You know what? We can cure blind people. There are many genetic reasons that people go blind. Horrible, because especially if you are born with certain genetic diseases that mean starting as like a young child and marching towards your adolescence, your eyesight is going to start decreasing. And your parents are watching this happen to their child, and they know that there is nothing they can do, because the reason sight is failing is because there is a gene in the eye that is not doing its job. It's supposed to be making a molecule that helps transmit light into an impulse in the brain, and the one that they've got is defective, and so just over time, the whole sight is going to deteriorate. There's nothing you can do. There's no drug that can fix that. So gene therapists sort of look at this and they say, okay, so the problem is that there is a defective gene in the eye, and let's fix that. Let's go in and put in a good copy of the gene, which can then start to restore sight. So some of the things that gene therapists have done over the past 20 years is they've learned how to take a good copy of a gene and package it in, actually, it's the sort of the empty shell of a virus. Viruses are these are nature's gene therapists. They basically get into our bodies and they insert their own genes somewhere into our bodies, and the end result is, for them it's great. They get to reproduce themselves. For us, not so good. We get, diseases. But you can take a virus and you can scoop out the middle bit, take out its own genetic material, and then replace it with something like this gene that you want to replace in the eye. And then you can take viruses, and they're tiny, tiny, tiny little things, even smaller than amoeba, and you can put them in a needle, and you can inject it into the eye of somebody. Don't worry, we anesthetize them first. And then what happens is that virus, or that sort of fake virus, goes into the eye, and it inserts this new genetic material, this replacement gene that you've put into it, into the eye. And all of a sudden, the cells in the eye that were not working, no, they start to work because the thing that was missing has now been replaced. So there's been some extraordinary progress in that, where we've had not even little kids, sort of young adolescents who could not see a wall in front of them, had this done in one eye, and within weeks have had their eyesight restored. So I like that example because it's very practical, and actually it's quite biblical as well. I like the idea of making blind people see, but that's some of the power of gene therapy, and there has been a huge number now of advances in it. The reason you guys are not hearing as much about it is probably because we are at the stage where we know how to do these things, but what we haven't nailed is how to do them at scale, how to scale it up and have it available in every doctor's office. These treatments are still at a stage of being quite specialized because we're at the early stages of developing the processes. So they only get done in places like USC, as sort of large academic medical centers. But because they work and because they address a need, absolutely, this is, 10 years from now, these types of blindness, it's just not going to be a problem anymore. You can just go in and get your injection as soon as your child is diagnosed, and they'll be cured. So there's some amazing things happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please join me in thanking Paula Cannon for that extraordinary presentation. I'd like to present this to you on behalf of the What Matters to Me and Why Committee, a journal, so you can continue to keep track of what matters to you and why. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and please join us for our last What Matters to Me and Why next month with Chief John Thomas. So thank you. Fight on.